On today's episode of DeRaud-Messinger Show, we're grading the 2023 Texas Longhorns offense. Dylan, today we're playing the role of some mean teachers, let me say. Not every student
Mm.
in this Texas Longhorns team is necessarily going to pass this class with flying remarks, but we're being fair here. In the first group, we have to look at is the quarterback position. Dylan, is Quinn Ewers your star student?
I'd have to think so. He struggled last year, but I think he's got, back together in some really key areas. I know what you were harping on pretty much all offseason, Devon, was that jump in completion percentage up to around the 61% mark. He actually went up about 10 to 11%, finishing with 69% completion rate after 58.1% completion rate last year, as well as obviously played in two more games, but he also threw for 3,400 yards over the 2,100 yards that he had last season. And on top of that, he had 5 rushing touchdowns, obviously showing off the legs, as
The
well
uh,
as the diet.
the
He's
diet,
showing up
the
to
Chick-fil-A
every
diet.
class with with Skittles. Now he's eating those sandwiches, really staying healthy. And you saw that with just the athleticism and uh, him actually wanting to use his legs this season, as well as he had 6 interceptions last season, Devin, and he had 6 interceptions again this year. But obviously, like I said earlier, 2 more games played.
What would you give him in a grade? Were you
Mm.
thinking
I had an A. I had an
at an
A
A?
because he was in the Heisman race for the most part during the season until that injury. Obviously, coming back, you just had other guys kind of just take a hold of it. So there wasn't really much catching up at that point. But again, I think he exceeded expectations. At least for me, going into the season, he showed improvement, which is huge, especially for a second year starter. So I don't see why I'd be giving him a grade less than an A at this point.
He definitely did show those signs of improvement that we talked about. As you said, he progressed, and that completion percentage being 10% higher than what it was the year prior was a big,
Yeah.
sign of a confidence boost almost for him, and I'm sure for Sark as well. And if he does end up returning, of course, Dylan, there's still some things we'd like to see improvement on. But with that being said, there was a mighty amount of improvement just from last year to this past season. Was he perfect? As I said, no, but he was pretty dang good. And as Dylan said, he was in that Heisman race for a while. Dylan, I think he might have lost the race a little bit before, after that Oklahoma loss, but he was at
Yeah.
least in the conversation. I will give him that. I'm gonna give him a A minus here, Dylan. I know I'm being a little difficult, but I think Texas fans want to see a little bit more consistency with him at the quarterback position. Definitely
That's
well
fair.
improved in that area as well. I think you can attest to that.
I would just say if he got more consistent, though, we're talking like A plus range at that point. Because with that consistency, then you start talking about just the leaps and bounds that he'd be making, as well as Penix was the difference maker in the Sugar Bowl. But if you were the ones that took that kind of leap that Penix did, we'd be having an A plus season on our hands here for him. So he's that close is what it felt like. That's why I went with an A over the A minus.
And I agree, he's definitely on like that borderline, and just some small improvements would make a big jump in my grading scale as well. But we'll probably talk a little bit more about Quinn in some videos soon. But overall, I give it A minus. Dylan's a little bit more giving, but maybe justly so with an A. Now we're turning over to the running back group. Now turning over maybe not is the greatest choice of words for me here, Dylan.
Ooh,
But
ooh.
this group, if I'm gonna make a analogy, I'm gonna say they are the transfer students to our school, to our class. Not a
Mm.
lot of experience, there may be freshmen. But Dylan, even though they're the transfer students, they were the popular kids in class. They really carried the load for much of our school, if I'm being honest. Don't want to take shots at our school, but Dylan, led by Jonathan Brooks, CJ Baxter, and Jadon Blue, what would you give this group of students?
I did an A plus. I almost thought that it was the best unit in certain ways for the Longhorns this season. And the biggest thing was beginning of the year, you didn't know what you were going to get. You saw bits and pieces of Brooks last season in the bowl game, but even then, you didn't really know what you were going to get going into next season. Then you hear these rumblings of CJ Baxter possibly, I think, named the starter right on opening day against Rice.
Yeah, CJ
So
was the starter.
yeah. So again, you didn't know what you were going to get, and then over time, especially during that Alabama game, Brooks showed that kind of experience that he had, but also the trust in the offensive line just to read his gaps there, and really just took hold of the position, and then took off at that point because he was honestly the best running back at least in the Big 12 for most of the season until he went out with that injury because he had 6.1 yards per carry 1,139 rush yards and 10 touchdowns, and as well as being utilized in the passing game, Devin. So again, I know an A plus it might be a bit much for somebody that's only played 11 games, but he's the number one running back in the upcoming draft class, and he really proved that he was the best player on the field for most of the games.
I completely agree. In terms of overall expectations, definitely I think overshot a lot of people's expectations, probably including our own. It was one of the key questions we asked entering this year whether the running backs could pick up the slack that was just going to be inevitably lost via the NFL draft.
Yeah.
You have the Falcons to thank for Bijan and of course the Bears for Roshan. But Dylan, I'm going to give this group an A, a very solid A. I was a difficult grader yet again. I'm going to be open and upfront about that. But Jonathan Brooks, it's unfortunate his injury and especially the timing too. If he was able to remain healthy, it's probably going to be more in the A plus category or side of grading. And Dylan, like you were saying, he was a Doak Walker Award finalist in the making at that point
Yeah.
in the season, and it was just unfortunate that he wasn't able to do that. And of course, we wish him all the best of luck in the NFL draft. Speaking of NFL running backs, one of the more fun players to cover during my time. And then we got to talk about C.J. Baxter and Jadon Blue. Of course, there were some, rookie moments, if you will, Dylan. But with that being said, they still really kept this team into contention in pretty much all of the games. And I don't know, Dylan, for a group that didn't have too much experience overall, let alone Baxter and Blue, I think A score for them pretty promising.
The talent's there, especially when you're kind of going into the SEC next year. I think there's a lot to like out of Baxter. It's just going to be more of getting that yards per carry up because he was at 4.8 on the season, as well as you used a transition for earlier, just cutting down those turnovers. But that again, that's going to happen as a freshman.
With time, exactly. And that's part of the reason I didn't give him that full complete score, but definitely Dylan, not too much left, I feel like, in order to get to their untapped potential. Now, next group, this is where it's going to hurt Texas, I feel like, next season with the change of the guard, Dylan. This is
Yeah.
maybe the popular kids that are the seniors of the school. You got the wide receivers and tight ends, led by Xavier Worthy,
Mm.
A.D. Mitchell, Jordan Whittington, of course, one of the unsung heroes, but in the eyes of Longhorns fans, definitely not an unsung player. And then Jatavian Sanders at tight end, doing the passing attack for the Longhorns. Definitely was pretty promising this year. What do you think?
Yeah, I have them at an A. Sticking with the theme here, seemingly enough. But again, they played incredibly well. They were I would almost say one of the most underrated units nationally. I don't feel like they got enough credit for a lot of the stuff they were doing and making Ewers' life a lot easier, especially with just the way that Adonai Mitchell, when Worthy was struggling, was able to pick up the slack. When Adonai Mitchell was struggling, Xavier Worthy was just going yard. So there was a lot to like this season. I think what's holding me back from an A plus. I think Whittington could have had a better season in a way, and I think some of it is just getting more utilized. Obviously, when you're with Mitchell and Worthy, it's harder to just share the ball around like that. So there was a bit of that. But again, Jatavian Sanders and Whittington combined for 3 touchdowns total. You would have liked to see more, as well as when we're talking about an A plus season, we're talking about receiving course kind of like Ohio State and Washington, in which they had number one receivers that, were making huge impacts pretty much every game for the team. And there was moments there where it felt like maybe Brooks had to save the game in a way and kind of carry the offense at times.
I agree. I also gave this group an A. It's kind of like what I was talking about, Ewers, and of course the two groups are tied. Just that lack of overall consistency. For the most part, all these guys were scoring touchdowns every other week, Dylan, I would say. Worthy, I know, had a streak of maybe 3 or 4 games with a touchdown. But as you said, when one guy wasn't being productive, the other guy, as in like a AD Mitchell, was. So overall, didn't kill the team, of course. They got pretty far, Dylan. But as you were saying, to get that just little extra step would get you into that Washington territory. But definitely, Dylan, without question, top 5 receiving team and
Yeah.
group in the nation. And I agree. I think the thing that held them back, yet again, a little bit of that consistency, but really not too much there. But I agree with the overall production standpoint that you said. The touchdowns, the red zone issues killed this team this year. And I saw a joke on Twitter, and it was almost fitting that the season ended, Dylan, on a missed red zone
Yeah.
conversion. You
He had
just
it though. Let's be real. The ball was there. It was good placement. Mitchell was right underneath it. It just got swatted away.
Yeah, it was a great play by
So,
the DB. Of
yeah.
course, there's some maybe a little better throw that could have been on the table, Dylan, but
Nope. Fair.
under duress,
Yep.
and if we were making the play, Dylan, I'd have been sacked 5 seconds prior. Let's be honest, but that's why I'm not playing for the Longhorns. But yet
That
again,
is why.
finding production, JT Sanders, as you said, only 2 touchdowns this year. Whittington only one. It was a little bit puzzling at times. This is something that Sark, of course, during this off season, is going to be deep into his lab of tricks and trying to figure it out. But that's what held them back. But overall, yet again, this year was definitely a cause of celebration for the receivers. Xavier Worthy, over 1,000 yards, 5
Yeah.
receiving touchdowns. Adonai Mitchell, 845 receiving yards, so close to that 1,000 mark, 11 touchdowns. Just overall, definitely A.D. Mitchell, Dylan, one of those surprising elements for Texas this year. Of course, we've seen some hints of his potential greatness at Georgia, but for him to be able to do that during the course of an entire season was a big step in the right
Yeah.
direction for him.
And it felt like you put him on a slant route. He's going. Like it's going to be hard to stop him at that point. So there was a lot of routes there that it felt like they knew they had that in their back pocket, and Mitchell was going to be open for a lot of this.
Exactly. And a lot of these guys are NFL receivers, but Dylan, when you're watching Adonai, you just felt like you were watching, potential first round, second round pick out there. And we'll see how he ends up doing in the draft as well. And to round it out, Dylan, we have the O lineman.
Mm,
And what is the O lineman in our class? Probably those students on the first row, appropriately, that are
of
just
course.
raising their hands in those cold calling classes, taking the bullets for the rest of the team, and just a promising, group of students in the whole scheme of things. But Dylan, just to list them off from left to right in this front row, you got left
Mm.
tackle Kelvin Banks, left guard Hayden Connor, center Jake Majors, right guard DJ Campbell, and then at right tackle you have Christian Jones. Now, Dylan, this group had such high expectations entering the year, and not that they performed poorly, but was it up to the expectations that you would be liking to give as the teacher in this class?
There's a lot left. I think that they're going to be the unit next year that you could see like the biggest jump in our grades when we do it again. So I have them at a B plus, just because there was more for them to do. They were semifinalists for the Joe Moore Award, which is huge. Texas was 17th in pass yards per game, 25th in rush yards per game, and the ninth in total offense, just nationally. So they did a lot of things, but you saw at times in their inconsistency, whether it came to illegal formations or the false starts, stuff like that, that kind of held them back. That they can clean up on, become a stronger unit, but also experience wise, this was a young team, and a lot of those guys are going to be returning as well. When you see like the pass catchers, they're all leaving for the NFL, but with the offensive linemen, you're going to be able to build that out. So I think next year they're going to be in a great spot. But again, I think you saw a lot of that inexperience and just growth that you're going to see over time. Just it needs a bit more.
What was their final score in your class?
B plus.
B plus. See, I
Yeah.
agree with the B plus. Yet again, entering this year, as I was alluding to, the expectations for this group, maybe not an A plus because that would be a bit high, but A minus,
Yep.
A range. The offensive line was pretty solid overall, as Dylan was mentioning. You aren't a semifinalist for any sort of award with bad performance, Dylan. Otherwise, I would question the committee that is giving out these awards. But it's just, it was such a great, potential group, being all, for the most part, pretty young, other than Christian Jones. No offense, Christian Jones, but you've had your time in the sun for the
Mm.
Longhorns. But with that joke, Dylan, Christian Jones is maybe the most surprising part of this Longhorns group, really reaching his potential on the last year of eligibility pretty much for Texas. Now right tackle is going to be a position of question. We'll see who fills that need. Texas, of course, has plenty of depth, so there's been plenty of players that have been waiting for that shot. But Dylan, the pass protection was not always the finest, and the team overall allowed tied for 60th in sacks allowed. Not too fine in the passing game. Just yet again with all these groups, what's separating Texas right now from being a championship quality team is that consistency in not only every game, but seemingly every drive, every play, Dylan.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yet again, as we're mentioning, left tackle Kelvin Banks, potential future first round NFL draft pick, maybe in next year's draft, Dylan. I don't know if Texas fans want to admit that just yet. He might be declaring a little bit early. But then throughout the line too, Jake Majors is coming back. There's plenty of talent on that, front. Can Texas sure it up with all the hecticness that's about to be coming next year? I'm not sure, but yet again, B plus for me as well. But more importantly than our grades, what are your grades for this Texas Longhorns offense? Let us know down below. Do you agree with our position group grading? Let us know. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, have a great rest of your day.